A rain of arrows covered the sky. Horses neighed, and at that moment, it was too late to wake from the intoxication of victory. The Muslims had conquered Mecca just a month ago. Their army had reached 12,000. They had never been this powerful, and perhaps they had never been in such a dangerous delusion. When they entered the narrow pass of Hunayn Valley, as the sun rose, the Hevazin archers behind the rocks were seen. But it was already too late. The ambush had been set, and the Muslim army, trusting in their numerical superiority, was about to learn one of history's most bitter lessons. This was one of the most critical moments in Islamic history. The conquest of Mecca had taken place in the month of Ramadan in the 8th year of Hijrah. The Prophet, peace be upon him, had entered Mecca with an army of 10,000 without any fighting. The Kaaba had been cleansed of idols. The Quraysh had been pardoned. Islam had become dominant in Mecca, the heart of Arabia. The news of Mecca's fall spread like wildfire across the Arabian Peninsula. Tribal leaders gathered in their tents, whispering anxiously about what this meant for their independence. For centuries, these tribes had lived freely in the desert, answering to no authority but their own chiefs. Now, a new power was rising, and it seemed unstoppable. However, this victory worried the surrounding tribes. Especially the Hevazin and Thaqif tribes were disturbed by the Muslims' growing power. The leader of Hevazin, Malik bin Awf, was a young but talented commander. At only 30 years old, Malik had already earned a reputation as a fierce warrior and clever tactician. His tribe respected him. He had studied the Muslims' previous battles carefully: Badr, Uhud, the Trench, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses. And he noticed something. The Muslims fought best when they were desperate, when their backs were against the wall. But now, after Mecca's conquest, they were confident, perhaps too confident, and he decided that now was the right time to strike the Muslims. Malik developed an unconventional strategy. He ordered his warriors to bring their families, women, children, and animals with them. The reason was clear. A man with nothing to leave behind fights to the death. The possibility of retreat was thus eliminated. 30,000 sheep, 40,000 goats, dozens of camels. The Hevazin tribe moved toward Hunayn Valley with all their possessions. The Thaqif tribe also joined them. The journey to Hunayn was itself a spectacle. The valley echoed with the bleating of sheep, the bellowing of camels, and the voices of women and children. Some warriors questioned Malik's decision. "Why bring our families?" they asked. "If we lose, they'll be captured." But Malik's answer was cold and calculated. "That's exactly why we won't lose. Every man here knows that defeat means losing everything. You'll fight like cornered wolves, not like soldiers with a safe home to return to." Malik's plan was simple, but effective. Set an ambush in the narrow pass, catch the Muslim army in the early morning hours, surprise the army with the first archer attack, and create panic. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, learned that Hevazin was preparing, he took action. Only 20 days had passed since the conquest of Mecca, but the threat needed to be met early. An army of 12,000 was gathered. 2,000 were Meccans who had participated in the conquest of Mecca, and 10,000 were Muslims from Medina. This combination of Meccan and Medinan forces was unprecedented. The newly converted Meccans marched alongside the Ansar and Muhajirun, who had fought them just years earlier. Some carried new armor, gleaming in the sun, spoils from recent victories. The army was well-equipped, well-fed, and supremely confident. On the 10th day of the month of Shawwal, before dawn, the Muslim army approached Hunayn Valley. The valley consisted of a narrow pass between two mountains. Rocks, curves, dangerous terrain with limited visibility, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was advancing at the front of the army on his white mule Duldul. His uncle Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, and a few close companions were with him. The rest of the army was following in succession, not yet fully awake, marching into the valley. High above on the rocky slopes, Hevazin scouts watched the approaching column. They counted the numbers, estimated the pace, and sent silent signals to Malik bin Awf. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The Muslims were entering the trap in a long, stretched formation, perfect for an ambush. Malik's archers gripped their bows tighter, arrows already nocked. Their orders were clear. Aim for the front ranks first, create chaos, let fear do the rest. When the front ranks of the Muslim army began entering the valley, dawn was breaking. The first rays of light were hitting the mountain peaks. The army was spreading into the valley like a long snake. And at that moment, Malik bin Awf raised his hand. The rain of arrows began. Suddenly, thousands of arrows shot up from behind the rocks. The front ranks of the Muslim army became targets of arrows without understanding what hit them. Horses began fleeing in panic. People crashed into each other. Chaos began in the narrow pass. The Hevazin archers were raining arrows rapidly. Every second, dozens of arrows were cutting through the air. Muslim soldiers began looking for cover, but there was no cover in the narrow pass. Panic spread throughout the army, and at that moment, something that had never happened before occurred. The Muslim army began to retreat, but this was not a tactical retreat. This was a flight filled with fear. Thousands of soldiers began running back the way they came. Horses, camels, infantrymen, everyone was trying to get out of the valley. Ranks scattered. Commanders couldn't make their voices heard. The army was no longer an army. It was a frightened crowd. Commands were shouted, but went unheard over the thundering of hooves and the cries of the wounded. The confident warriors who had boasted of their numbers just hours earlier now pushed past each other in desperation to escape. The Prophet, peace be upon him, on his white mule, alone, continued advancing forward. His uncle Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, was holding the mule's reins, trying to pull the Prophet back. But he, peace be upon him, continued to advance. I am the Prophet, this is no lie. I am the son of Abdul Muttalib. His voice was echoing through the valley, but those fleeing didn't hear, or didn't want to hear. Only a handful of companions remained around him. Ali, may Allah be pleased with him. Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him. Umar, may Allah be pleased with him. Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him. And a few Ansar. In total, they were fewer than 100 people. Malik bin Awf thought victory was near. He gave the order for his cavalry to charge. The Hevazin horsemen began advancing into the valley in waves. At that critical moment, the Prophet, peace be upon him, turned to his uncle Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, and said, "O Abbas, shout, call the Ansar." Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, had a very powerful voice. He shouted with all his might, "O you who pledged allegiance under the Samara tree, O people of Surah Al-Baqarah, your prophet is here." This call struck like lightning in the chaos of the valley. Among those fleeing, a few people stopped, turned around, and saw that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was still in the battlefield, alone. Something began to change. In the human heart, fear was replaced by another emotion, shame. Some soldiers from the Ansar suddenly stopped when they realized they were fleeing. Their faces turned red. How could they flee while their prophet stood there? The first person to return, then 10 people, then 100 people. Muslim soldiers began returning. But this wasn't easy, because thousands were still fleeing, and the pass was narrow. Those returning were trying to force their way through those fleeing. Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, stood before the Prophet with his sword drawn. Every second a Hevazin warrior approached. Every second an enemy was driven back. Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, and the other few companions surrounded the Prophet like a fortress. The Prophet, peace be upon him, took a handful of soil from the ground and threw it toward the Hevazin army, and in a loud voice said, "May their faces be blinded." This was a supernatural moment. According to narrations, at that moment, dust and dirt filled the eyes of the Hevazin warriors. Their vision blurred. They experienced a moment of confusion, and right at that moment, the returning Muslim soldiers reached the front. Now hundreds of people were fighting alongside the Prophet. The number was rapidly increasing. 1,000 people, 2,000 people. The direction of the battle began to change. Hevazin's first shock attack was repelled. Muslim archers began counter-fire. The cavalry got organized. Ranks were reformed. And now this was a numerically superior army. Malik bin Awf was astonished. The army that had just fled was now fighting again, moreover even more determinedly. When the Muslim forces emerged from the narrow pass and reached open ground, their numerical superiority began to take effect again. The flanks of the Hevazin army came under pressure. Its center was shaken. The companions were fighting with incredible determination because they had just fled. Now they wanted to erase that shame. Every strike was like an apology. Every move was an expression of regret. The Hevazin cavalry began to retreat. The archers abandoned their positions. Malik bin Awf saw his army scatter, and he was forced to withdraw. The Hevazin army began retreating toward Taif. But this was not an orderly retreat. It was panic. Families, animals, soldiers, everyone was fleeing. Muslim army pursued them. Thousands of sheep, goats, and camels were captured. Malik bin Awf's decision to bring families along now proved to be a great mistake, because they had to leave them behind while fleeing. 6,000 prisoners were taken, 24,000 camels, 40,000 sheep, 4,000 ounces of silver. The war spoils were enormous. That was one of the greatest spoils in Islamic history. The Thaqif tribe took refuge in Taif and went behind the walls. Part of Hevazin managed to escape. Malik bin Awf retreated to the mountains with a small group. In Hunayn Valley, now there was only dust, blood traces, broken arrows, silence. The Muslim army began to gather. The wounded were treated. The martyrs were buried. And everyone began to think about what had just happened, because this was not an ordinary victory. This was a lesson. The Prophet, peace be upon him, addressed the Muslims after the battle, and he reminded them of the verses that Allah revealed in the Quran. Indeed, Allah has given you victory in many places, and on the day of Hunayn, when your numbers pleased you. But that number did not benefit you at all. The earth, despite its vastness, became narrow for you. Then you turned back in retreat. Surah At-Tawbah 25-26. The Muslims had relied on their numbers. They had said, "Today we cannot be defeated because of our numbers." And Allah showed them that victory comes not with numbers, but with faith. The intoxication of victory is the greatest danger. The arrogance that came after a great victory like the conquest of Mecca almost led to destruction. The true test of faith emerges in times of difficulty. Those who fled returned because they could not leave their prophet alone. True faith was in this return. leadership emerges in the darkest moment. The Prophet, peace be upon him, stood when everyone was fleeing. Alone, with a handful of people, he challenged the entire army. And this stance brought the army back. After the battle, the leaders of the Hevazin tribe came and converted to Islam. Most of the prisoners were returned because the Prophet chose to win hearts rather than spoils. Even Malik bin Awf eventually became Muslim, and the Prophet returned his former possessions and family to him. The defeat that began in Hunayn Valley ended with victory. And this lesson has reached us even centuries later. Power is not power unless it is based on Allah. What battle should we cover next? Drop your suggestions below. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.